how do you go into the door? Because a button has to do that. Or do you just like walk into it or whatever? But if there's a button whose job is taking you to the door, that button can't do anything else.
Yeah. So
unless it's a generic interact button, in which case, are there other things you interact with in the world?
What
Or
does
is it
that
only
mean?
doors?
And is there only one way to
mean-
interact with those things?
Can things be close to doors? Because then if you can interact with two things in like the same radius, then like
How do you detect which one the player's trying to interact with? You know,
Welcome to hell.
yeah.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 459 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I sometimes make auto actions in Clip Studio Paint.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and Clip Studio Paint.
Mm-hmm.
Also working in the games industry. Today is March 14th, 22x4. It's Pi Day, boys.
Oh, yeah.
3.14.
Yeah, yesterday I wasn't paying attention to the date at all, but just perchance I saw something about a pie, and I was like, oh my God.
You got to get in there.
So
Get that pie.
I started Googling
Wait,
pie
before
places.
you say anything else.
Profanity warning.
Profanity warning.
Yeah,
All right, carry on.
So I started looking for pie places in St. Louis, and I was like, and I realized I haven't even like really looked at the pie places in St. Louis. I don't even know what's here.
There's some real good ones.
Yeah, found all these dope pie places that sounded awesome, and all of them were like, by the way, we're sold out for the next like 4 days.
I was going to say, yep.
It's Pie Day.
It's Pi Day.
Pi Day.
Yeah, so.
Also, I do want to point out every Pi Day in the 20th century also has like the next round of digits, 3.142. You know what I mean? 2024, 2, right? 314, 2. Because it's 314, 159, blah, 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 blah.
Something.
So it's pretty, we're in a nice whole century where we get a fourth digit of pi.
We got to figure out
Every
the time. If it was like March 14th, hour 15, which would be like 3 p.m., right? We got to figure out what's the...
Oh, how far can you go to let it...
Yeah, like what time of the day on
The only
March
digits
14th?
I remember are 3.14159. I don't know what happens after 9.
Yeah, so it'd be something around 3 o'clock or something.
I like that.
On Pi Day is like legit. It's like pie moment. Like that's the time where you got to eat
If
your
you could
pie.
be eating,
right?
if you could be putting a bite of pie in your mouth at that time, that's how you might, well, I don't know, you might trigger like a black hole. Or who knows? Who knows what happens? It's like an inception.
Literally nobody. Nobody's tried it
Something
before.
spooky.
But if we're in a simulation, that would probably be one of the cheat codes.
Oh, totally.
You know,
Yep.
if you eat a slice of pie exactly
At pie
exactly. The problem is it's an irrational number, so
So you can't.
it keeps going forever, precision wise. So you'd never actually be able to do it.
You
So
can't, but if
it's a bummer.
But if you did, though, that's how you get in.
But if you did,
Yeah.
that's what happened. Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money to keep this podcast going. And today we're going to talk about some Helldivers stuff, and then we're going to get into some questions. So what's the news in the world of Helldivers 2?
What's the deal? So I just want to bring it out as a very interesting way that they've been pursuing an online sort of live service strategy with this game. So live service games are those that, essentially evolve over time. They're typically multiplayer. So this is your Fortnites, your even like World of Warcraft stuff, right? They all count as kind of the same.
They're the kinds of games that cost a company continuous
Money.
cash to keep alive, and then players continuously don't want to give money to play it. So nobody will do subscriptions, and instead companies have to do a trillion other things to make money, like loot boxes and shit.
All your little in-game stores, whatever, right? So what's been super interesting is that most of the time in this context, you'll have big updates come out that are like very well telegraphed and promoted ahead of time, right? So it'd be like, oh, there's this new, I don't know, World of Warcraft patch coming out, blah, blah, blah. There's
Or
new
you'll have
Fortnite.
a new
stuff.
season or a battle pass.
Yeah, a
that
new
comes out
season.
with new content. And
So it's been very fun to see with Helldivers is that they have like a battle pass thing going on. They have like a new one launching. But that's not really the thing that's clever about what they're doing. What they're actually doing is that some pieces of content that are completely new. So in this case, there's a flying bug that'll show up. It's like Starship Troopers is basically the game, right? So you're shooting bugs on alien planets. So
Yeah, bug not like a problem with the code, but like an actual bug.
a giant bug that will chop your face off. So they have these flying ones called Shriekers that they were in the box art, right? You see them in the back of the box art, but they actually weren't in the game when the game launched. And then suddenly they've just been showing up, but not for everybody. They've just been sort of like just almost like hand placed a few times a day. Some people will see a nest of these things, get totally fucked up by them. And then, of course, this causes a little stir and they post like a little video. Oh my God, we found some of these shriekers. But the thing is, they didn't tell anybody this was happening. Yeah. It's the community's finding out that it's happening. Right?
Oh, this explains. I saw some exchange where like somebody had tweeted about it or posted about it, and then the devs replied to it basically saying like, "What are you talking about?
Yep,
bugs can't fly. Quit with this like this propaganda." So they're just like denying it that it's
it's hilarious, and it's like they're doing it across the board with a variety of things, right? Where there's all these essentially like surprises that are built into the live service model, which seems like such an obvious thing that you can do, right, as a dev, but it's also a thing that nobody does. Like you don't get surprised in this kind of a way where like literally while you're playing the game after there was no big update that was that like obviously was paired with this. It sort of happened just almost like randomly a couple of days after it.
I kind of know why. I mean, live service games basically live or die on novelty and balance, right? Yep. So like if you release, it's like something that happened back when I was playing Tribes Ascend was also a game, live service game that lives and dies on microtransactions and stuff like that. And they're like, well, we got to keep adding stuff to this game or people will stop playing it. And so they would come up with a new type of weapon or something like that. And they would always overtune that weapon to be like extremely powerful. So that way people would spend money on it. Right. And so ultimately that killed the game. Right. Yeah. So like you got to be really careful like with these kinds of things with live service games. But because live service companies are so cautious about that nowadays, they telegraph everything that they're going to do well in advance so that the players can kind of like give advanced feedback about their opinion about what's coming. But that means you're never really surprised anymore. If you're playing, like if I'm playing a World of Warcraft, I know what's coming in the next patch 3 months in advance. And there's been nonstop community discussion about it on everywhere you look forever, right? So people already have a strong opinion about what's in the game before it's even in there. And then you never really get to scratch your head and be like, wait, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. But
there isn't an experiential sneak peek either, right? It's like you've got it's in there or it isn't. There's not this. Because I also saw this on with Helldivers because there's other from the original Helldivers. There's like two other entire distinct like enemy types or something in it. And one of them is this like very scary. So there's the cyborgs basically, right? And I saw, or is it actually, are the Enlightened and the Cyborgs two different factions? I'm actually not even sure, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But there's like these other like more humanoid kind of factions rather than just robots and bugs, right? And I think it was last week, similar to this, people started seeing like a spaceship in the sky that was like covered in blue lights, right? And is like, if people who played the original know that it's from that, right? But that was all that happened. Right.
Yeah. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're creating
giving you these hints that like this stuff is coming, but only to some people and only sometimes.
Some of the time.
Yeah.
It creates this like this as actual feeling of participating in essentially almost like a D&D campaign, but with like hundreds of thousands of people where everyone's kind of experiencing or asking questions about like what this means all the time. And it's even gone so far as there's these huge like sandworm skeletons that you find on some planets that are like kind of like embedded in rock that are apparently moltings of a bug, right? That's going to show up.
Oh yeah,
later.
I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen those. And each time I saw one, I was like, please tell me I'm not going to have to deal with that.
Well, just this fucking week, earthquakes just started happening.
Oh yeah. All right. Yeah.
And everyone's like, so they're doing this. It's so clever, right? Because it's like there's an anticipation moment.
Everyone's talking about
where everyone's talking about it and you're trying to figure out like, please don't tell me this is going to happen. Like, please, God,
but also, please tell me this is going to happen. You know.
Yes, but also do it, please. You know,
this speaks to like two things. One is a level of confidence in QA that most studios do not have, because if you're going to put something like launch something into your game that you have not previewed or publicly tested on like a public test server or anything like that. Then you're confident, like, yeah, this is fine. We could just patch that thing right into the game straight up. no community testing, no betas, nothing.
Yep.
And it's just going to be fine.
I actually think you could also take
A
that
plus,
the other
you
way
know.
because they kind of are doing that. They're kind of doing these like you kind of think of this as like a testing strategy.
It's almost,
too,
I
right?
guess it's almost like a rollout, right?
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
a
only a
slow
small
rollout.
fraction of people see the thing.
Yeah,
so it's like,
now
but
you
it's
have
a
an
clever way to
opportunity
do
to
it
fix it
safely.
Yeah, because you're building hype while it's happening, and like the game is a little buggy, right? Like we've had lots of crashes and stuff, right? But I think it's
I mean, I heard it's full of bugs. You know,
it is, yeah. But the core design of the game of being PvE, right, and the game session based and celebrating hilarious, horrible things that happen to the party who was playing against the environment, right?
They line
makes
it up
so that
great.
you can just because like that means that you can just suddenly drop in like a new horrible creature way out of balance that just decimates the team. And that
it's hilarious.
is amazing. That's an amazing, delightful experience that you just had. If it happened all the time, garbage, terrible. You don't want that, right? But you can, as you're doing this stuff, you can bring in an enemy type whose only purpose is marketing, that only appears
100%.
for a few weeks, that just shows up on everybody's thing even and just like kills everybody. And then it's gone. And that would be an amazing experience, right? Because it's not about winning, even, right? Like that's the big picture thing, but actually the moment to moment experience is actually what it's about.
But this speaks to a second aspect of this that like I'm excited to hear about this because I just had kind of the opposite experience recently with the new Avatar Last Airbender live action, which is understanding what it means to build anticipation and suspense and then pay that off later.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So the challenging thing with building suspense is that as a creator, you have to trust your audience, where you'll actually give them something that they don't fully understand, they don't have all the answers to, but because they trust that you're going to pay that off later, and you're trusting them to be patient and to be curious, right? That it works. And so I was just chatting with Adam and Sam earlier this week about how like I watched the Avatar: The Last Airbender remake, and I did not enjoy it. And there are a lot of reasons. It's kind of hard to articulate all of them, but I realized, this week, one of the big things that just made it very flat compared to the original was they rearranged the order of the storytelling, where instead of like showing you something that you don't understand and then over the course of episodes revealing more and more about the origins of that thing and the backstory of that thing so that you're constantly seeing it in a new light and understanding it more, they rearranged all the storytelling to pre-explain everything before it happens, and then it happens. And when that happens, it feels like you're just experiencing the same thing twice. So there's no real surprises. It'd be kind of like, if instead of this like earthquake thing, right? If like, let's say the first time you encounter one of these like big exoskeleton things, text would pop up on the screen and say, looks like you've discovered the exoskeleton of blah. Like you'll probably experience earthquakes at some point later, and eventually one might come out of the ground, right? And it's like, okay, well, that's fucking ruined. It's just ruined now. Like,
leave it
because
open,
now you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because the fun part of like when you first see the skeleton, because I saw one of those, and
I think we saw when we were playing, right? And, this is like that
and I was just like, oh no, but
we both were just like, fuck this.
Yeah, but from playing video games, I know that when you see something like that at that scale,
it's the Chekhov's gun, right?
Yeah,
like it's gonna happen.
Well, actually, no, then it goes either way.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Often that when you see something like that, like, oh, this is just an environmental piece here for impact.
Environmental
to give you a sense of like the place that you're at, but that doesn't mean it's coming, right?
It's not gonna come alive. No way.
But also, though, from playing video games, that might. So it's kind of it's a Schrodinger's Chekhov's gun, where it's like where it like may or may not appear, but you now know you've been taught about a thing, and so now in your brain you've got this new thing that's going on in your human body where you're like worried and excited about the possibility that thing is real, where you also won't be disappointed if it's not, because you don't think it's going to be real.
And you kind of hope it's not.
You kind of hope it's not, and you kind of hope
but
that
if it is, that would be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you end up in this new mental situation where you're just like, you actually haven't been, nothing's been revealed because you're still left with complete uncertainty.
You're in suspense.
Yeah, you have no idea. It's just a sense of suspense. And eventually, like my experience was that I kind of forgot about it. And then I saw like a few more, but by that time we hadn't seen something that looked like that was alive. And I was like, okay, it's probably environmental, right?
It's just art.
Which is then cool if they bring it back around. Because I heard about they were adding like new stuff to the game, and I heard about like they were adding earthquakes. But I didn't know about like, I didn't tie any of these things together, right? Mm-hmm. And other people did, but they still don't know, right? They're just trying to make sense of the world, and they're talking to each other about, ooh, what if, right? What if this is
I think it's a spectacular thing that I think I haven't seen it, frankly, in games at all, just at all in the last like decade, where, especially for a live service game, where the stuff that is happening is actually being discovered by the community sort of first and foremost, if that makes sense. And not in a way that's like so clearly like, oh, it's a huge, here, there's a new campaign patch or whatever, like in Diablo or something, right? Not quite like that, but like you're just playing the game again, and then like some zany shit happens that no thing in the game even alerted you that could happen, right? It starts breaking this.
It's smartly using the community as like an additional mechanic, right? Yeah. Which is like if you're engaged with the community, then you'll be hearing about this stuff. Because like if you're playing on your own, you might not ever see these flying bugs because they're rare. But then if you don't check Twitter, if you don't look at the Reddit threads or the forums or whatever, then you would never hear about it. And so that like this kind of a thing also just like ropes you in. You know? Mm-hmm. But yeah, something that
it's great.
I feel like is. I don't know. I think it would be wrong for me to say this is like more prevalent now than it used to be. It's probably just always been like this, but like I've personally picked up on a lot of games, shows, movies, whatever, that seem to take this very defensive storytelling posture where they just are so worried that people won't get it. And so they do the thing that I was talking about where like they pre-explain everything before it happens. And then it backfires, has the opposite effect where it blunts the impact. But I think it's a defensive way of doing it because everybody's worried about attention spans, right? Yeah. Like if we make our audience slightly confused or disoriented or uncomfortable for even a moment, then they might get frustrated and wander off.
Well, I think
so
it's
let's make sure.
I think it's just a real problem there, though. It's a real problem. I don't think it's about attention span. I think it's just about people's ability to understand the media they're consuming, right? But despite the fact that everyone was like, people these days, like, I don't think there was ever I don't think it's any different back when Starship Troopers, the movie, came out, right? Mm-hmm. Most people did not understand that it was satire.
A satire of fascist
of how bad fascism is bad, et cetera, right? Like that was that, and that was 30 years ago or whatever, right? So like, or 20 years ago, whatever it's been. And that was, if you go back again, and let's take some other classic thing, like it's the same story over and over and over again. So I agree. There's a sense of like, but I think most media historically also has kind of been the same. Like it's like everyone's trying to play this game of like, how do I make sure that what I'm trying to convey actually is being conveyed, and how much do I trust the person? How much do I? And because there's also like you can play other games where you're intentionally confusing people on purpose, right? Which is different.
Yeah, there's a line to walk.
Than not giving them the information that they could infer, or that it would be more interesting to the viewer if they discover that reason later. And all of this is extremely difficult. That's hard. I don't even think it's about like what your trust of the audience. I think it's just how good of a job could you do, because it's really hard.
Yeah. Also, and how complex is the thing that you're trying to do it with, right? Because I think in there's also a different thing with like getting someone started. We talk a lot about how hard the first time user experience of a game is to just like because that's the place where basically
people don't know anything.
People don't know anything, and you have to decide kind of where you're falling then on the spectrum of like how far are you letting people kind of wander before you point out that they're wandering, or just how handholdy they are. And I think on the one side you have the your mobile games, free play games, oftentimes that are like just making you click. And they lock you out of everything, and you get to click a certain button to spend. You're like, they may walk you through just every piece.
Yeah, they do not trust you to discover things on your own. Yes. They do. They literally,
which is also interesting though, because some of those games too don't actually meaningfully take context into account. So that they kind of like, it's kind of like they gave you a board game with a manual, and instead of letting you like play to learn it
by playing,
they just force you to read the manual line by line, right? Because I've had that experience with a few mobile games where I'm like, they're like, you can do this to buy one of these gems, and I'm like, the fuck, what can I do?
Why?
Well, yeah, it's also like it's engineered to make sure that you know how to spend money in this game. Like that's the real point of mobile game tutorials.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, we've had this question when we're, I think, especially when you're initializing a player experience is where this is most fraught, right? Because the thing is, like, once a player's in, right? I think that's what's interesting even about the Helldivers thing is like once the community is established and then the whole thing's kind of cruising and you got people who've been playing for like 100 hours or some shit, you have a lot more leeway to be vague and to do confusing shit and have it be exciting. But at the beginning, especially like, it's very hard.
Everything's confusing.
Everything's confusing for people.
You can't be coy.
Yeah, you got to figure out like how explicit are we?
Like what the game is also dictates that too, right? Because like in Helldivers, because of the idea that like you're a nameless, faceless grunt who is disposable and who is undertrained, like thematically, right? Like you're just somebody off the street.
You're supposed to be kind of confused.
Yeah, your training was like 2 minutes long, and that was it, right? Then there's so much stuff they don't tell you in the tutorial, right, at all that I just happened to discover because I like saw a random TikTok video that was like, here's some tips about Helldivers 2. It's like, did you know that if you hold down the reload button, you can have alternate firing modes for your weapon? And I was like, no.
Yeah, that would surprise me too.
Yeah, how would I have known that? But it becomes actually like, because of what Helldivers is, I wasn't mad about that, right?
No,
because it's not a competitive game. I'm not trying to be like I'm not actually trying to be the best Helldiver. I'm not really mad when I die. Like I'm not mad when
you're still effectively playing it, and what you're finding is additional depth through those things, but not necessarily like you're not stuck.
Yeah, the tutorial for what the game is, the tutorial told me all I need to know, which is here's how you reload, here's how you call down stratagems, right?
Here's how you dive,
and here's how you dive. Crawl. Now, that's it. That's the whole thing, right? Because with that, we can go play, and
and that's totally explicit, right? Totally explicit,
and that might be all you ever find out.
Yeah.
But you could still play to level 40 without knowing any of the other stuff, right? Yeah. It might start to become a struggle, but really you could get there, you know. And
there's also a weird thing that can happen with tutorial stuff where if you tell people a lot of things back to back, and you don't give them much time to do their own thing in between, then people very quickly fall into a passive mode where they won't explore stuff because they will just assume that if something matters, the game will just tell them about it. And so you can create a trap for yourself as a designer where you over-explain stuff right away, and then you've got a real hard time making the game feel deep and interesting because nobody's going to explore.
But there's also an expectation trap there of like, because if your title is on mobile, then players come in with that expectation in hand already, no matter what you did right in the game. And we saw this for the most, like Crashlands, OG Crashlands is it was a weird game on mobile for that reason, right? Because it was like more of it wasn't a mobile-y game, right?
Yeah. We never froze the screen and
and we still
forced you to click on a shop button.
And it's simple interactions, and we tell you how to do stuff, right? But like, we never told you how to like move or how to pick stuff up in the environment, right? Because the idea was like the player's going to tap on the screen probably.
Just touch stuff.
And the moment they do that, right? But there was one person. Who was really mad because
we got an angry letter from them.
Yeah, because like, and it was basically, and if it's an expectation mismatch, or what they're used to when they pick up a mobile game is that the mobile game tells them literally exactly the things that you can do and when to do them and how to do them, right? And all the person would have had to do was just tap on the thing they were trying to pick up. That's all they would have had to do.
Because there was a moment that like told them like pick up the space wrench.
Yeah, but they were like, how?
They're like, how? And they never tried anything. And so they were like, I've been stuck in this tutorial for 30 minutes because it keeps telling me to pick up the space wrench and I don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, did you try
tapping on it?
You know, anything?
Yeah.
because the first thing you would probably try, which is just touch the wrench with your just tap on it, that would have done it, but they just never did.
Well, and it's easy to make fun of that, right? But it also
there's a training thing there. Like they've been trained to not touch anything unless the game tells you to.
There's other things, which is like it could be the case that they tried to click on it, like they tried to do that at one point. Might have been the first thing they did, and it might have like they might have misclicked or something, and then just automatically written that off. So I guess I can't pick it up, right? So there's all those factors in here. So I think basically, I guess what I've just found so impressive about this on the Helldiver side, kind of relating it back to the broader point, is like knowing how much, basically managing information asymmetry is not something that you generally see now in like a live service title. There's not a lot of anticipation building. There's not a lot of trust in the audience because I think and largely what you're seeing is people want to make sure that you can pay them money for stuff. That's sort of the vibe. So you kind of need to know, you want to know all the details about all the stuff, right? But this just has a very different feel to it. And it's just refreshing as fuck.
I think I have a different take on it because I think all those things could be true. As in, I think they could have very intentionally laid all this stuff out this way, right? But I think the shape of the game, the overarching design and thematics of it, and the fact that it's PvE and that it's like all the things that go into like what the core
simulating a galactic war.
Yeah, like which are all very good design choices, right? I think that collectively made it so that that basically like they can. And I'm saying get away with not because like they should do it differently, but as in like they can get away with this really wide range of like how exactly they approach telling you how to do stuff, revealing new content, like that kind of thing, right? Where in other contexts, other games with different overarching designs, you have, because I think like the overall design of a game is what gives you the narrow or wide range of ways that you can onboard the player, ways you can change the game over time, all that kind of stuff, right? And if you're in like a competitive PvP shooter, right?
Yeah, everyone needs all the details.
Everyone needs all the details, and they need to be able to, and they're going to be mean to each other, and you have to take that into account when you're like deploying new content, right?
How will my players use this to abuse each other? You know, with this new feature I want to add.
And so that has to go into the design, that has to go into how it's revealed, has to go into everything, right? And also because there's like money on the line for like tournaments and stuff, right? There's like all these like other sort of things.
If you're doing esports stuff, well, and there's like a design of player investment, because like something that's pretty interesting with a game like World of Warcraft, which is you play a character, you level it up, you gear it up, keeping that character up to date and staying on top of being good at it is a continuous investment. Like you're just always playing the same character. And if you wanted to experience the game from the perspective of a different type of character, like a different character class or something, you got to make a whole new character and put tons and tons of time into that. And so
it's like the difference in the shape of a game then means that you wouldn't want to entice someone to do that unless they were able to have like a pretty good picture of what that means, right? Ahead of time.
Well, but it's even to the point where it feels unfair, right? So like something like in the most recent big patch, it was all about the Emerald Dream, which is historically a thing that druids in the lore of the game have been very involved with, this like dream realm place that they can like go to when they sleep or something. And so all the druid players were really psyched because they're like, oh, there's going to be so much cool druid shit in this new patch. And there wasn't. There was literally nothing unique for druids to experience that anybody else couldn't also experience, because if they said like, yeah, half of the content in this patch is druid specific, then everybody who didn't play a druid would be like, well, I'm bored. I don't want to like make a whole ass druid and level it up and do all this stuff. Yeah. So instead they just don't do that kind of stuff because they can't really.
Or if they were going to, they'd have to telegraph that way ahead of time so that people could level up their druids, so that they could.
But then you have a meta level community problem, which is now if suddenly tons and tons of people are all playing the same class, then it ruins everything else.
So I think that's exactly it. Like depending on the overall design and shape of the game, but the constraints that you have for how you do stuff, how you change stuff, how you do all of these things can differ really dramatically. And I think, to Helldivers' credit, I think the design choices they made, whether they were intentionally to have these outcomes or not, the design choices themselves were good. It's just a really solid framework for what the game is. And they've then either as part of the whole design or a discovery about their design, right, have found that now they are able to deliver content and onboarding and these like in these ways that allow for them to like just do kind of like even like the most recent patch, they nerfed the shit out of like the weapons that they found people were primarily using, right? And then boosted some other ones, right? And the parts of the community who had like settled into like, you use this gun, like this is what you do.
People were not happy about this.
Yeah, of course they're not happy about this, but like, what is the actual cost to them? It's like they just go grab a different weapon. That's it.
Yeah, they don't have to spend 100 hours learning an entirely new character class or something like that.
Yeah, and it's also because the game, like everything about the game and like what the developers are saying and what the community is kind of reinforcing is the idea that like you're not supposed to be min-maxing in this game, right? That's
you're gonna die.
The point.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
And because of that, then even though we do, like people can't help it, you're going to min-max, right? Even though people do that, as they start to settle in, when you take that away from them again, even though they're mad about it for a little bit, that's still the expected thing that was going to happen though, right? And so you can get over it. You can move to a different way of doing things.
I think my favorite thing about it is that it provides, there's this thing that I've only seen in this context, which is a combo of excitement and fear when a new thing gets added that is even good for the players. So, for example, because the players finish this galactic war effort to conquer a particular planet, they got mechs for a week. So a week, everybody could just call down a mech whenever they wanted, right? Because the planet that they liberated was where the mech factory was. But then the question immediately popped up. People were like, but what do we need mechs for?
Yep.
What the fuck? And it's like, oh no, right?
Yeah.
There's this feeling of like, and then they're looking at it and they're like, oh, this planet is right on the edge of where the automaton enemy forces are. So like, what if they take the mech planet? Like, are we gonna get like huge Godzilla mechs from these bastards? Like, if we let it creates,
and none
it's
of that
not
even
just
has
like
to
you get a cool
happen.
gun.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But now all of a sudden people are speculating.
It all could.
It all could
might happen.
And now you're
it's
imagining
great.
all the possibilities. Then whatever gets delivered, even if it's none of that stuff, even if all you got in the end was mechs, which is dope.
Still great.
Right?
Yep.
That it's still a great outcome. And so now also like on the developer side, they get to kind of just monitor what people are talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
And
they get to then be like, oh,
stuff.
it would be, this would be fun. It would be really fun if this is the thing we actually delivered in terms of what people are thinking it's going to be. Or we see what they're talking about and we're like, okay, we're going to make this a real surprise and go in a completely different direction. You know?
But yeah, like I've never seen that where, we talk about in different game designs, like part of the idea, even with Crashlands 2, what we're trying to do is make it so that when you're away from the game, you have something to think about it, right? Like the way when you left, I like the most basic version of this is like, I have a plan for what I'm going to do when I come back, right? There's like enough to think about that you want to do that. Or there's open questions about how a quest ends, your next piece of equipment that might complete a set, whatever, right? And so I think it's interesting is the fact that they managed to do that basically it's a interaction with the game on a whole other level that is just fun. It's this whole theory, like what's going to happen because we got X, what's going to happen? And it's like, that becomes a whole other fun part of engaging with that kind of a game. Right. And it's really interesting. It's very cool to see.
So something that's probably, I'm gonna throw out a word of caution, which is if you're interested in playing Helldivers but haven't yet, you should do it now. Because in the long term, every gaming community becomes jaded. People will not be as excited about this kind of thing next year as they are right now. And also, making games content is very difficult and expensive. And over time, these kinds of things will become formulaic. So right now, like the stuff about like the earthquakes and the bugs and stuff like that, it's all very new for the community. But if, 2
over a long
months from
time
now,
scale of seeing these things, right? People are going to be guessing pretty good.
Yeah, because like people will start to figure out how it is that the dev kind of is wanting to reveal things and roll things out. And the more of these kinds of like surprises and things happen, the more the community will be like, oh, this is just like that other thing that happened 2 months ago, right? And
it's that old hedonic treadmill.
Yeah, so like if you're really looking to probably like have a blast with this game, get in on it now before things become more predictable, I guess.
Well, I think on that topic, I think this is the ultimate failure of the whole concept of live service games, which is that you cannot defeat the hedonic treadmill. It's not possible.
No,
it's always moving, and
you have to always be changing something in the game.
Yeah, and like you can't do that in the long term without putting people into a different game entirely. Because they need a fully new experience, right? And I think the fact that everyone's like you see all these articles recently about like the death of live service, right, and all this stuff, right? And it's basically kind of for this reason, right? Which is it's extremely difficult technically to do. It's really expensive.
Well, and
it's really because if you do it successfully, it works. I think that's the thing. Is like the reality is like
but it still runs out, until you get.
And you got like League of Legends, you got World of Warcraft. It's like 20 years now.
There's a trajectory though, which is like there's something that reminds me of when I was taking
saturation.
my economic stuff. Is there's a thing called a resource trap, which is let's say like a country that is currently not doing well economically suddenly discovers like big oil reserves or something. And like prior to that country had a diversity of industry and things going on. And then pretty soon, all the best paying jobs are in one thing, right? Like oil. that then sort of like redefines the whole infrastructure of the country over a couple of generations to the point where everything is now imported. You don't make anything locally. Right. Nobody invests in learning about anything other than this one industry. And then when that industry starts to decline because, maybe your reserves are drying up or global
demand goes down.
Demand goes down or whatever.
Things change.
Then you basically have like a weird like lost generation where people suddenly have to like relearn how to do everything because nothing like you no more money's coming in, but also you've lost all the local skills to do all the things you used to do, right? And like this will happen this did happen with Blizzard with World of Warcraft, where WoW was making so much money hand over fist. And it actually did feel kind of like what you're describing with Helldivers, which is that everything, like you could tell that the company was hyped about the game. The players were hyped about the game. Everybody was just over the moon about how cool this thing was for several years, right? And you could tell that the devs were just having fun with it. They were like teasing stuff and like rolling out cool stories and whatever. But then the moment the player count started to tick downward, suddenly there was a notable shift in the kinds of things they were adding to the game, the amount of investment they were putting into the game, and it switched them into this defensive posture.
Right. How do you keep people around, basically?
How do you keep players and how do you drag things out and how do we cut costs and like reduce staff while still putting out something for people, and over time it becomes very formulaic and all that. And so much of their internal resources go into that then when they finally pivot away from that and start working on other things like Diablo 3, it's just not at the same level as what they were doing before, right? Like when Diablo 3 launched, people had a real bad time with it, right? But when Diablo 2 launched way back in 2000, 2001,
99 or 2000.
It took over the whole fucking world. Like people could not, it was amazing. People could not stop playing it, right? And so like they just lost the ability to just like make that game. Like among other things. And so like this is what you can kind of see with like companies like that. And then the problem is everything gets wrapped up in one product. And then as that product declines, the company really struggles to keep existing.
Yeah, I will say that is to me the benefit of not pursuing a live service strategy. It's risky. Everything in a game is risky, so that's kind of relevant. But like
but a game that depends on live services.
Yeah, it's especially
really
interesting.
And you need scale for live service. Like you can't have a team like our size and do a big live service game. Like Level Head was about as close as we probably will get, which is like it can run on its own. Yeah. Players can make content for each other, and that was our way of saying like we want to make something that like a community can interact with each other over, but where we don't have to constantly be doing stuff to keep the game interesting. You know what I mean? Yeah. So. It is. I do feel like it's a trap, though, that live service games can be. So I'll be interested to see a year, like checking in a year from now, how things are looking. I think it'll still be super cool and super like people will be very pumped about it, and there'll still be a bunch of new and interesting things a year from now. But there might start to be some cracks showing in like the enthusiasm and the player counts.
That company that does it is a private company, right? They're not owned by anybody public or anything. Because I think that's the other part of it too.
That also changes things.
Yeah, is that you're allowed to just have a good time. Because like if you're them or if you're the Subnautica team, right, where you launch something and just made infinite money, or Arc, right? Just you have infinite money that you basically just get to decide. Like you can either then take the businessy approach and be like, all right, how do we like extract maximum cash out of this and like be a capital B business, right? Or you could say, we got enough money, we can do whatever. Let's just keep having fun. And if you do get to say, let's just keep having fun, like that's when you could have a thing that keeps on going. I think it's still really hard.
But also a lot of companies like that will still have investors who, once they get a taste of a return, they're like, you get that pressure turned up, and they're like, we need increasing profits every quarter.
Yeah. Right?
Which
if they don't have to chase the capitalistic heroin, right? Then they can make this last longer than they otherwise would. If they do have to chase that, it's not going to last that long.
Yeah, it'll burn hot and then burn out. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, but I think you're right there. I think that's good advice. Though, is like get in on it now if you haven't yet, because even if it keeps on going successfully and keeps on thriving, there's going to be a really big difference in how it feels in the early days when everything is new, everything feels big. And even the people who are now like veterans have only been playing it for a month, right? It's going to feel really different if you come at this in 6 months.
This is the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they re-released a classic WoW, and wow, that was a different experience, from what it was back then when people didn't know anything, and it's just not the same. So you can never recapture it. All right, let's get on to questions. Highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from UppasitFlitwip, who says, "Hey, Bscotch fam, I was curious about a decision you made with the original Crashlands on mobile. You opted not to use a joystick and instead to tap the screen to move the player. I've noticed my thumbs are in the way of my combat a lot when doing this, since you have to tap the enemy, and obviously this covers them up. I guess figuring out how to attack and handle all those variables with the joystick and directional attacking could be a nightmare. Anyways, just wondering why you chose to go with tap over joystick." Great question. Well, with Crashlands 2, we're going with the joystick. It is more complex. I think for the original Crashlands, we were going very mobile originally with the design. We added PC partway through dev as a target platform, but a lot of the initial foundations of the game were made with only mobile in mind. And we wanted to make a game that was extremely accessible, but still had a lot of depth to it. And something has to give there in terms of complexity. Yeah. And so it was the controls. It's like, well, if all people have to do is just touch something one time to get results and not have to think much harder than that, then we can have more depth and complexity elsewhere in the game, right?
What's interesting though is I think it did backfire in a funny way, which is that it is part of the benefit of it, which we wanted, was that one of the things we hated about crafting games generally was having to always go pick your proper tool for harvesting. Yeah,
there was always an obvious tool you should be using, right? But then you had to go manually pick it and stuff. Yep.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's like it was interesting because I think that allowed us to do the one touch thing, which you don't typically see in a crafting genre, but also have varying tools. But at the same time, it could also be one of those things that like maybe was just an overly focused nitpick of the genre that we decided to then, by virtue of solving that, which means that every time you go to approach a resource, we know exactly what you clicked on. We just pull out the appropriate tool for it. By virtue of solving it that way and removing that problem that we didn't like, you end up forcing a level of simplicity on essentially the whole rest of the game, right? If you say it's not just that you automatically pick the appropriate thing, it's that you cannot pick anything that isn't like the exact thing you should be using for that. I think even with bombs and stuff, you can't actually just throw a bomb.
You can't throw a bomb at the ground because clicking the ground is you trying to move there. So instead, you always have to throw a bomb at something. So, it creates its own weird set of constraints. Yeah. But the other kind of funny thing is now with Crashlands 2, we explicitly wanted to get away from that very simplified model of interacting and basically say, if you have a bomb, you should be able to throw it wherever you want to
maximize your results of your throw. That's fun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Throw it at the ground where a creature's about to land instead of having to click on the creature itself and then your bomb. Then that forces us to make bombs that are certain size so they always hit, whatever. So there's a lot of that. But one of the things that was kind of funny in retrospect when we were first designing and experimenting with the mechanics of Crashlands 2 is we definitely swung the pendulum way too far the other direction.
Yes.
Where, for example, we had ideas like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was a creature that had a stony shell on it and you have to break the shell off using your pick, your mining pick, before you can actually deal damage to it with your weapon, right? And it's that's something, different. It's a multi-layered way of interacting. But then if you actually do it in practice.
It's theoretically interesting. It's academically interesting, right? It's
But then on paper, it's well, still there's only one way to approach this problem.
Yep.
Which is hit it with your pick, then hit it with your weapon. You're not the player isn't doing anything dynamic with that kind of a contrived scenario.
They have to now somehow learn or figure out what the trick is with this particular creature, right? So so you move this space where now it's the interesting thing is given that there's a correct way and you have to figure out what it is. That's basically what the change is, right? Then now where the interesting stuff comes from is for each kind of thing you face being okay, I don't know if I can just fight it. I have to figure out what its thing is. And once I learn that thing, then I do the right sequence of pick this and then that, whatever.
The problem is you run into that puzzle game problem just immediately, which is like once you know how a puzzle is solved, it's actually boring as fuck.
It's not interesting.
Executing it. Yep. Every
And
time.
if it's
So
not
boring.
easy, like just manually to then go through the sequences you have to go through, once you do figure it out, then now it's tedious and frustrating, right?
Well, and it closes the play space because now, like, okay, what do you got to do? You always have to approach it this way. That means we can't. It's not like combat normally is, where ideally you have a variety of means of disposing of enemies in very cool, strange ways, right? If you always have to use a pick first, I mean, it's just boring. You know what I mean? It's not.
Yeah.
You don't have the same breadth available as far as.
And that can be
options. So we
interesting
definitely
if
made a
like
mistake
there's
with it.
one creature that has that behavior, but that's like a very atypical experience, right? Because now you go into like, oh, this is a weird.
It could be interesting if it was a boss. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly,
I think,
yeah.
I
Or
think you got to
something
deal
rare,
with
right?
once. Yeah.
Yeah, because then it's figuring it out. But yeah, if you figure it out once and then you have to refight that same thing 100 times, so it's like, all right, well,
no thanks.
it's just
It's not
step
good.
1, step 2. So those are the kinds of things. And like we had, I think instead the complexity and depth of Crashlands 2, we were originally looking at a lot of things like that, where it's like you have to figure out like there's like some special way of doing a thing.
Yeah, it was stuff like we would say, oh, there's berries on this tree, and if you chop it down, you won't get the berries, but if you just slap it, you'll get the berries off it. So you got to like figure out how to interact with it,
Kind
which
of
also
arc
ended
style,
up being
right? Same idea as like an arc.
Yeah,
If you actually can use like an axe or a pick on a tree, and you get
And it'll-
different subsets of resources if you do that. But there's no way to know that. So, but once you learn that that's a general thing, then it basically means okay, now every time I see a new kind of thing, I got to hit it with all the kinds of stuff that I got to see what the variation is of items I can
But
get.
it's like,
and
I
then
think that one's mainly
like,
just weights, though. It's like you still get the same stuff, right? For
I
the
know. I
most
think
part.
there's some
like,
different stuff you get depending on.
yeah. But like it ended up being one of those things where again was
You just gotta memorize it, which is not
we
fun.
yeah
It
it was
adds
like
too much weird cognitive load of like, okay, I want to go get a thing. Okay, do I need to slap this bush or do I need to chop it? So instead, like a lot of the interesting complexity of the game has moved into either like things in the world interacting with each other and in ways that you can influence. There's like knocking things around or like having creatures fight each other and
or
recognizing
getting them
which creatures are hostile towards each other.
yeah or like waiting for them to they go and do like a particular behavior for a resource like in the environment, like you would see a creature like a beaver cuts down trees, kind of the same idea, and then you can go collect the trees, like kind of the same thing.
Like there's some resources that you can only get, for example, like if a creature interacts with a resource that changes something about that resource, and then you can go collect the, kind of think about like a bee making honey, right? Like you can't just get honey. You need a bee to go get stuff from a flower and then go like transform the pollen, right? And so we've got a lot of those kinds of things where it's less about you having to do something complicated and more about you just observing and understanding how things interact and then using that to your advantage, right? And then the other layers of complexity come from a lot of the just like all the different kinds of equipment and ways that you can interact with the world.
Which really all those opened up because we switched to the twin joysticks as opposed to the
Yeah.
tap, right? Because you got aiming. Aiming is basically the fundamental part of the game now, as opposed to like not a thing, I guess.
Well, and our buff system is very robust. Because like in the first game, there were like a very specific number of buffs, and each one did very specific things. So when I say buffs, I mean just like a temporary effect, either positive or negative. Typically, a negative one is called a debuff.
So it's like I'm bleeding. Ow,
I'm bleeding. That's a debuff.
I'm
right?
weak.
And what happens when you're bleeding? Well, blood comes out of you and it hurts and you lose some HP. What happens when you're poisoned? Well, pretty much the same thing, but it's a green cloud
green
now
now,
instead of instead of like red stuff.
What happens
squirting
when
out.
it's fire? Oh, it's the same thing. but
That's
now-
orange cloud. And so with Crashlands 2, the buff system, we spent a lot of time thinking through making it so that it could hook into things. And so like for example, we have an entire way of playing that's all about generating static charges of electricity on yourself, which those buff you directly just in terms of like giving you speed and attack speed and stuff like that. But also then there's a bunch of other things you can get that interact with that static. So you can discharge it onto things or use the static to make yourself stronger and consume it. And, so it's like you build up all these little weird interactions that you can exploit within your own equipment and your own character and combo things together in like really cool ways. And like that combined with all the aiming and all the positional stuff and all the things on the world means like playing the game through a second time is going to feel very different than the first time because you're going to know a lot and you'll be able to use that knowledge to do all kinds of wacky shortcuts and interesting things that were always there as an option your first time through. You just didn't know, right?
Yeah. Or as you know, we are actually supporting multiple play styles. Like they feel fundamentally different. Like playing as this kind of staticky one versus like this void set. It's like got all sorts of weird stuff going on. Like if you played through it, part of the goal is how do we make it so if you played through it a second time, you could actually play it differently in terms of the moment to moment experience, largely oriented around combat, of course, and have that, be good still. And so there's these multiple play styles that start smashing together basically as you get further into the game that you can mix and match to really get some weird stuff going. That's just kind of like fun.
And we also had to scale things back because we had similar plans like that for the harvesting side, but it was way too fucking much. Because one of the things that we kind of recognize about Crashlands is it's a multimodal game in the sense that you can play it with different attitudes and vibes, right? So like if you're looking for a intense combat challenge, you can go get that in the game. But if you're also looking to just kind of chill and just like build a base and just
harvest stuff,
harvest some, do some farming, in a way that you're not constantly like min-maxing and fighting for your life, and then you can do that too. And when we first started working on some of these concepts for Crashlands 2, again, like we swung the pendulum too far. And we had all these ideas about these really intricate and like skill-based ways that you were going to be harvesting wood and stone, like all the materials out in the world. But it reminds me when we talk about WildStar.
Yeah.
Where
challenge begins.
Yeah, WildStar was the MMO where like if you just did anything at all, like you just like click on a butterfly and then this fucking voice comes in and goes, challenge begins, like pick up 10 butterflies in 10 seconds. And you're like, oh fuck. And you just run around. It's like you can't just
you're like, I didn't want that stuff.
You can't just be.
Yeah.
And so in Crashlands 2, we kind of recognized that, like the combat side of the game is that. Like that's the more intense, min-maxy, making combos kind of thing. But then the harvesting side should be interesting
but chill.
And occasionally have like cool things like, creatures that interact with resources that.
But it's more of a thinking and planning game than a reactionary one, which was the difference, right? Saying like, "Oh, I want to go get this, and I know that I need to go to this area, make sure those creatures are around, or lure them in so that they can interact with this thing, so I can collect whatever comes out." That's a chill thing. You can plan for it ahead of time, but you don't gotta go. You don't gotta figure out maximizing your combos of buffs and hotbar slots and stuff.
You don't need a whole equipment set just to like slightly get more
some wood. Yeah.
Well,
I think that the challenge we had earlier was like in the swing from the original Crashlands to the original Crashlands on to Crashlands 2. I would say it was basically an over complexity, or rather consistent complexity, basically across all of the game systems. As
every single thing in the game needs to be like very deep and complex. It's like, no, keep some things simple. And
even I think even the things that got more complicated. We have a ballyhoo coming out soon about pets that Adam put together. The pets are far more complicated than they were in the original, but the way you interact with them is not.
Well, I wouldn't say they're complicated. I would say they have depth.
They have depth, yeah.
But
and I think
it's not hard to figure it out.
Yeah, that was the trick of going from Crashlands 1 to Crashlands 2 was trying to give everything more depth and give you more ways of doing stuff, but without complexity. And I know, like personally, like I understand the idea of like your fingers in the way, for like a one-touch experience, right? But that was one of the things I loved the most about playing Crashlands on mobile was it made it feel so chill.
It's simple to play.
It's simple to play. And even like when I'm in the middle of combat, like there's really one thing I can do, which is just tap the next thing. It's very straightforward. And so I actually enjoy, like I liked playing original Crashlands on PC and on my phone, but I actually liked it more on the phone. It was just more.
That's what it was originally made for.
That's what it was originally made for, but also just like that's where it had the strongest, like what I sort of associate with Crashlands of like, I'm on an adventure. That was the vibe that I got. Not that I was trying to skill up and kill everything or, whatever. And so the Crashlands 2, that was the question is like, how do we push everything further and make it all more interesting and deeper? So that, and also make it so that, because we're talking about like, we're talking about like the accessibility range of like who can play, who is this for? Mm-hmm. We want it to go wider in both directions, ideally, right? As in, like, even if you're even more casual than what you could do in the first Crashlands, like, ideally, we would try to find a way to make that possible. If you're more hardcore than what we had in the original, like, we want to try to have that too. But by having designs that allow for that whole wide range is just extremely challenging.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And I think that was that was the big like things we dropped the one touch input. I think completely, right? Like that's not a way
you cannot. There's no one. You can on PC. You can still click to move with the right mouse button.
Yeah,
which we added that kind of recently. But again, like because you can like aim your abilities and cast them in directions and stuff like that, then like clicking somewhere in the world, we have no way to discern why you're clicking there. Do you want to move there? Do you want to attack there? You know,
so
what
that's
are you doing?
Kind of fundamentally, that's the biggest underlying change, like how you go about doing stuff in the world as we move from the one tap to you now have movement is separate from doing stuff, right? And then the challenge was we did that because that basically allowed us to definitely expand the hardcore range, right? And give us like kind of as far as we wanted to go in terms of like combat stuff, right? But what it also meant is we changed where the floor was for like the most accessible way of interacting with the game. And we had to figure out how do we still make it so that works too, right? Which I think we did. I think we got there, but it was
but it will still be the case that preference wise, you know, there will be some controversy, I think, just because people who played the first game, like it was a one-touch game, which like we just discussed, made it so that there were certain things we couldn't do, right? There were certain things we could do and certain things we couldn't do. We switched the control scheme to expand the scope of things we could do. But that does mean that if you really wanted it to play exactly like the first game, it's just not going to.
It's not an option.
We think it plays better than the first game, but it is different. It actually kind of reminds me of like the first time I tried soy milk, where I was expecting it to taste like milk, and it didn't.
Yep.
And I was upset about it
because it is.
And then I gave up on it. And then a few years later, I had it again. I was like, "Oh, this is good."
Just as
because it is good.
Because even like from our alpha testing, like one of the things we heard from people, because I think one is like, did you manage to preserve what feels like playing the game?
Yeah.
Right. Not the actual like mechanical piece of it, but like, does it feel the same? And a lot of the comments we got, like one of my favorite ones was someone's like, it just feels like you took Crashlands and just cranked everything up by like 1,000 degrees, right? Just
more Crashlands.
Yeah. Even though when the reality is if you play it and play Crashlands 2 and then go back to Crashlands 1, it's weird. One, you don't have a juke anymore, which frankly feels very odd. All of a sudden you go back to Crashlands 1, not being able to like do a little kind of dodge.
Yeah. If you play Crashlands 2 for a while and go back, you'll be like, oh, I see. I see why they made all these changes.
Yeah, but it's funny because it is like the way that I like to think about it the most with Crash, like the Crashlands 2 to Crashlands 1 difference along all dimensions is Crashlands 1 was 7 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. It's a long time ago. And most of the people who played it basically around when it came out, right? So they haven't played it for years. And so Crashlands 2 is going to come out. And the thing where like you remember the experience you had playing a game, right? And you remember it in this way that
what it feels like.
Because you remember what it feels like exactly, and like the kind of the vision you have in your brain of like what it was like is fairly disconnected from the details of like what the art actually looked like, what the tapping, the moment to moment like interacting actually felt like, right? And I think the best that a sequel can deliver is making it feel like you're playing the old game, but because you have grown as a person, you've experienced more things as a person, et cetera, right? That the experience that you have is you're like, oh, this is just like the original, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But if you go back and play the original, you're like, holy shit, no. This is how I remember the original, but it's not like the original at all.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I feel like we made it so that Crashlands 2 is the it's sort of like the nostalgia filtered fever dream of what it was to play Crashlands 1. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Brought to life.
Yeah, yeah. What you imagine it was.
It's the soul of the game moved forward in time.
Yep.
So yeah, if you do, when Crashlands 2 comes out, if you pick it up, you're like, oh, I don't know about this new controls thing. Just give it 5 minutes. Yeah. Just give it 5 minutes.
Because I mean, I was in that camp. Like when I first picked up and finally played it on mobile, I was like, the little joystick came up and I was like, ugh,
what is this?
Adam was like, oh no, this is a mistake.
Yeah. And but I just started using it because I was playtesting it, And once I got past my reaction to the absence of just being able to tap, then I was just playing it. And it was irrelevant. And I've almost, within minutes, I didn't even remember that was how I used to play the game, right?
Largely, it's just anybody who's had an initial response to it completely forgets about it within minutes. So it's that just means.
And again, it's only for people.
So that's okay.
It's only for people who played the first game and are expecting it to control the same way. Like people who are coming into Crashlands 2 not having played Crashlands 1, will be completely unfazed because it just plays well.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So, yep. So that was, a lot of considerations for controls stuff. But just like we talked about with the Helldivers thing, it's like the design that you pick is going to constrain all the other things that you can do later. And we did it this way because we wanted to open that up.
I do think it's one of the interesting things about game design is that when you hear like new game designers talking about like what they want their game to be, et cetera, right? It never includes what's the control scheme, right? But the control scheme is actually
that just dictates everything else.
It's the foremost set of constraints you actually have.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is dictated by your control scheme, and like how a user actually can send inputs into the game, and how you can make sure the game can interpret player intent based on that set of inputs. And honestly, that's the whole thing.
Yeah, one of my favorite exercises is if you, let's say you've been sitting on a design for a game or like a thing you've been thinking about for a long time, map it to a controller.
Yeah.
Just even if you're like, I'm not going to put this on an Xbox or a Play, I don't care. Map it to a controller. Because the reality is funneling it through that particular constraint lens provides a tremendous amount of clarity as far as what is actually going to happen when certain buttons are pressed, right? Because at the end of the day, no matter what someone's playing on, they have to interact with it somehow. So you may as well use one of those models.
And it shows you how complicated your design is, right? Because and what the player's sort of mental overhead is going to be trying to understand how to interact with your game. Because it seems like conceptually until you've done it, it seems like not a big deal. Like, oh yeah, controller's got a lot of buttons. I got a lot of things I want to be able to do. It's a fucking, as I've said, it can be fun if you're into this kind of a thing because it is an interesting design puzzle, but also it's a nightmare because like trying to fit all the things you want to do into these really tight constraints and the whole time
it makes it real. It makes the design real.
Yep. Yeah, that was like I think that was basically the first thing that Sam did when we started working on Crashlands 2 was like, or one of the early things.
It was one of the early things, but I think I didn't. It was one of the things because we never had to do it before, right? Everything else has been so straightforward for our previous game, even Levelhead, right?
Levelhead's a platformer. Like we know how platformers control the controller. I mean, the level editor part was a challenge, but
so there wasn't as many. I guess I didn't know that it was a thing that I essentially should do. So I think I did it like 6 months in or something, and it clarified like just like 1,000 things immediately. And Seth and I both were just like, why didn't we fucking do this? Okay, I didn't know that was such a good exercise, So yeah, I think whatever we make, next, 100%, that's gonna be one of the first things we do is like, we talk about what this is going to be, map it to a controller.
Yeah. When it's in retrospect, it's such an obvious follow on because like often your game design is here's what the player's going to do. Right. Mm-hmm. And then the next part is, okay, how? Yeah.
Literally how, what button do they press?
And if you never get to that point, then like the what doesn't really matter because if you can't figure out how the player's going to do all the cool things in your design document, then they're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, when it's the kind of stuff where it's like it's not. Yeah, it's easy to underappreciate just how constrained you actually are in design for a game based on inputs. Because if you would revisit the door problem, which always comes up in game design stuff, where it's like, if you want a door, what are all the rules? How does it work? One of the things that doesn't come up that often in the door problem, like in the list of things, is like the input system and how that interacts with the door, right? Because then the question is like, how do you go into the door? Because a button has to do that. Or do you just like walk into it or whatever? But if there's a button whose job is to take you to the door, that button can't do anything else.
Yeah. So
unless it's a generic interact button, in which case, are there other things you interact with in the world? Or is it only doors?
And is there only one way to interact with those things?
Can things be close to doors? Because then if you can interact with two things in like the same radius, then
how do you detect which one the player's trying to interact with?
Welcome to hell. There was this actually great example of this in Helldivers, speaking of, which is that for some fucking reason, this is actually my biggest gripe, which is great, but this is my biggest gripe, is that for some reason in the game, you press and hold tab to pull up your little mini map, okay? And you also hit the alt button while you're running or something like that.
No.
Essentially find other stuff.
I can already see where this is going.
Right.
I don't know why the fuck they did this. There's other buttons available. Okay, we got some other keys.
So you're just constantly actually alt tabbing out of the game.
For a while, I could not figure out what the fuck was happening because it doesn't fully alt tab. It would just sort of like sometimes
or something.
Yeah, it like lost focus, and so I could still like move, but I couldn't do other. There was just like weird shit was happening until I just remapped my controls to not be insane. But I was like, this is exactly
which
one
is
of those
also
things.
funny because like that's one of the things I'm bad at Helldivers. Like I have a great time, but I'm not good at it. But one of the reasons I'm not good at it is because I have not figured out the diving like, because that's one of the core things you're supposed to be doing is diving all the time. So it's interesting because like I didn't even think of this because I'm not good enough at the game yet to even have like Alt and Tab as things I want to do, be in close proximity, because I'm not doing either one of those nearly enough as I should be doing.
I moved it so that it now caps lock is the thing that, because of course, you know, I don't care about typing. Who needs it? Caps lock pulls up my fucking map, and then I use X instead to like vault on things or whatever else instead of Alt, and then space to dive because space isn't dive, which doesn't make any fucking sense to me at all. So it's one of those like,
it is an important thing to think about. It's not just like what key is available to bind to this thing. There's a follow-on question, which is what other keys will the player be pressing in close proximity in time to that thing, and is that weird? Are they like far apart? Is it a key combo that causes problems?
On mobile, if you swipe up from the bottom and you pull up the home bar, and if you swipe up again, then now you're out of the game, right? That always happens. So there's no way to turn that shit off.
Well,
so,
on iOS specifically, but
yeah. Well, a lot of Android OSs, depending on kind of which one your devices, do a similar thing. So like, have you keep that in mind? Because if you got swiping going on in your game, watch out. Because things are going to be happening on the OS level, you know, and it's like, oh God.
And you can't stop it.
You can't stop it.
Yeah.
And also that stuff can change, you know, because that didn't
used to be the case on iOS until the iPhone X came out. And then suddenly everybody had to redesign their interface.
But Android, I think 13 or 14, like added a whole new like way of how you do gesture interactions with stuff to like just look at things and swipe between. Right. And like as a user of the platform, you're just like, oh fuck yeah, I've got more cool ways of doing stuff. And it's better for the operating system, like for you to interact with the system. Right. But now like, does the game still work though? Because now all of a sudden, like people are doing different gestures than they were previously to accomplish operating system tasks. And
does your game have gestures? And whoops. Yep. As one final note about kind of a funny controls oversight thing about the Apple Vision Pro. Okay. So because it's basically an iPad that you strap to your face, you don't have a mouse, you don't have a keyboard, you don't have a controller. It just uses your pinch with your fingers, you kind of, and it just uses that as a click. But you don't put your hand on the thing that you want to pinch. You just are pinching, just kind of in open air. Right. So how does the thing know what you are clicking on? Well, it uses your eyes. Whatever you're looking at is the thing that you click on. And so I was reading this fucking hilarious review of somebody who was trying to use the Apple Vision Pro to write a document. And it turns out that if you want to hit the backspace key, so if you want to delete something, you have to be looking at the backspace key and then hit your pinch with your fingers. Right. And so you cannot see the thing that you were deleting because you have to look at the backspace key. And this kind of thing happens a lot also because like, once you've like when you're using a keyboard and mouse, you'll put your mouse over something and then you'll look at the next thing that you're doing while you're clicking, but you can't do that with the Apple Vision Pro. So there's like part of it is a training thing where like whatever you're looking at is what you're clicking on. But that's also now a huge problem because you can only click on what you're looking at. And so, trying to just do something really basic like write some words.
Turns out to be
nearly impossible.
I think this is the interesting thing is like if you're a person like us who spends all of our time on a PC doing hotkey intensive things, doing like really fast typing, all this, like the number of actual individual inputs that we're interacting with for our normal day-to-day work is enormous.
It's insane.
When I then go to a phone, which I know how to use it. You know, I know what I'm supposed to do to like make things happen. It is the most frustrating, aggravating experience possible because all the things I used to be able to do with like the flick of a wrist, you know, or whatever is now like, okay, I got to like go through a sequence of steps because my only interaction with this fucking device is tapping a pane of glass. That's the only thing I can do.
If you're a power user on a desktop machine, then using a phone
it's just
for anything. Yep. All I want to do is throw it across the room. That's all.
The Google search, I don't know what the deal is. Google search, you enter something, God forbid you want to change the search that you just made because I don't know why. It only shows you the end of it.
Yeah, it only shows the end of it. Yep.
And you can scroll back, but it won't actually fucking move what you see. I don't know How is this?
That stuff recently?
That doesn't make
not
any
to get
sense.
fully off topic, but that stuff seems to have gotten worse recently. Like I don't remember having this much frustration as I've had recently.
It doesn't make any sense.
They might have accidentally fired the person who was supposed to fix
To be
that.
fair.
Yes, that's been going around a lot.
Yep.
Anyways, all right. Well, we're over time here, so we'll have to
design's
wrap it
hard.
up. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCoster for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts and keep the game rolling for a good launch. We'd appreciate that. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.